Hey everybody, thank you for making it to the webinar today. We're going to discuss effective online teaching methods, and this is the first webinar of the new calendar year, and so I'm excited to get started. I am Dr. Sean Newfer. I'm the director of the Department of Educational Technology. Just realizing it says instructional technology on my slide. That was an old title. But I want to get in and talk about the difference between traditional learning, the traditional classroom, and online learning, noting that there are some differences, some notable differences that I think are important. And so getting started, I want to talk about what is traditional learning? What is a traditional classroom? I'm sure that all of us have been in at least one or maybe many, several classrooms in our lifetime, but there isn't a one traditional classroom. If you think of a brick and mortar classroom, it could be a large auditorium or some sort of amphitheater. They might have a projector with screens throughout, or it might be a big blackboard in front of the classroom. These days, that's probably more likely to be a smartboard or a projection of some sort. In fact, I don't even know if my kids know what a blackboard is, other than something they see in pictures occasionally. Um, Probably in our settings, we're more familiar with a more intimate setting where there's a number of students in a classroom. This image reflects more of what we see at our various institutions. But there is a commonality between all of these settings. It doesn't matter what the milieu is, what the environment. Typically, a traditional environment will have a teacher at the front of the course offering discourse to the students. They're going to be instructing. That's their job as instructors, is to instruct. They might occasionally ask a question and solicit involvement from the audience, at which point a student will respond to the question or the prompt, and another student might offer their thoughts on the initial student's thought or address it back to the teacher, and then the teacher takes over and really guides the lesson. This format is what we've seen ever since Socrates, Aristotle, even Jesus taught this way as he's teaching the multitudes. It was what we call a sage on the stage, teaching to people, kind of talking at people in a degree, although we do want to get everybody involved in the discussion. It can be hard in a traditional classroom setting. And one reason for that is because, economically speaking, time is a very scarce resource in a classroom. If the teacher is talking, that means other students can't be talking. If one student's talking, that means the teacher isn't talking, and everybody else in the classroom is not talking either. Otherwise, you get crossfire, which is multiple people talking at the same time, and it's hard to pay attention to anything. It can be cacophonous, and it's definitely not productive. But one drawback from this approach also is that there's really no room for tangential thoughts, because ultimately, if you're thinking, if you're going on a different path with your thoughts, that means you might be missing something important that the teacher is saying or that another student is saying, because you can't think something and listen to something really at the same time. And so we ask a lot of students in traditional classes. They need to think quickly and profoundly and within a time limit. And that can be a real challenge. It's a skill that we develop over many years, and it's a skill that many people are good at, but it still takes a lot of effort. And this is the reason why Mark Twain has been credited with saying that college is a place where a professor's lecture notes go straight to the student's lecture notes without passing through the brains of either. I don't know if he really said that, but the sentiment still rings true. And so essentially what we're looking at is this sage on the stage that I kind of compare to, if you remember the old-timey water skiers, where the person's driving the motorboat and they might be pulling like a dozen people behind them, and they're standing on each other's shoulders, and they're making a pyramid, and it's great to look at. I think that would be really fun to participate in that as well. But the problem is when you use this metaphor or this analogy as in a classroom setting, the students have a lot of pressure to hang onto that rope. If they drop, then they risk being left behind, because it depends on the teacher. They might not be thrilled about circling around and pulling that skier back up. And so when we look at online classrooms, we have an advantage to online learning in that we have a different dialogue, a different format for dialogue. If I advance this next slide here, you can see that that concept of crossfire, multiple people talking at the same time, it doesn't really apply to online learning unless you're having a webinar or like a synchronous class meeting. But if it's an online discussion board or a group project, then multiple people can be working at the same time. And in fact, it's good for them to be working at the same time. And this requires the professor in an online setting to really act as the guide on the side. They're not there to disseminate information. If that were the case, then students could get that from a YouTube video from a library or something. But what we really want in an online setting is to build a network, to build a community. And we're going to talk about how to do that. This also requires the professor to leave that professorial ego in the office, really act as a guide. And one thing I like about this picture that's on the slide there is you can't really tell which person is really the teacher, as opposed to the previous slide. If I jump back here, yeah, obviously there's a teacher, there's a guide, there's a leader of the classroom. And in this case, the teacher could be any one of those figures. But the expectation is that everybody participates. There are no back row sleepers. Like I was in history class in college. I spent many classes on the back row, and occasionally I napped during class. I tried not to, but it was rough. It wasn't really my subject. But in online, there are no back row sleepers. In fact, everybody is accountable for their participation, and it's very easy to track as well. And so instead of this analogy of water skiers and the professor pulling everybody behind the boat, this online classroom is more like a sailboat where the students are fanning the sail, but really the professor is steering the boats. The professor has the hand on the tiller and is guiding the class, but it really takes the effort from the class. And the professor really can't steer the boat without the students, then the students would be directionless without the professor. So we're going to talk about some important constructs in online learning. And it's really, this is important in education in general, but really we can gravitate towards online learning because it's a really good platform for this, starting with constructivism. So constructivist learning occurs as learners are actively involved in the process of constructing meaning and knowledge from the course content, as opposed to passively receiving the information, as Mark Twain alluded to. And so this is the duty of online professors, is to create those opportunities for students to be active contributors of their education, and so that they can collaborate with other learners. And in this picture here, I'm going to change my mouse to a laser pointer. You have a student here who has a thought right there, and that thought might be added to by another person's experience or another person's professional background. Which can be blended with this other thought, an insight that another individual has. And in that sense, learning isn't just rote. It's not just, you need to learn these facts and this information so that you can take the test later on, and so that you can pass the test and you can move on from this course. Now, rather, constructivism is, we have information, we have resources available to us. We have readings, the assignments, we have a professor who can guide us and who's knowledgeable and experienced with this, but we also have other people within the class who have their own approaches, and based on that, we can construct a reality. We can be active learners within the class. And so this is quite a duty for the online professors, creating these opportunities for students. And so we're going to dive into, how do you create a supportive online course community? And there's one main point that I want to get at before all others, and that is to be present. Often people are active in a course multiple times throughout the day. A professor is expected to really be present every day. It could be multiple times per day. The expectations of students are that the professor is there 24/7, always available. This is despite the fact that all people, all of us, we have things like family, we have church, we have sleep that is also important, community obligations. And I know of a few people who actually have hobbies. Even in this day and age, there are still people with hobbies out there. And so, you won't be thrilled about receiving a text message at 4 a.m. and the person expecting that you'll respond by 4:15 or 4:05. So really it's important at the beginning to set expectations, but you do need to be be present. What you don't want anybody to ever say in your class is anybody here? Like, is there even a professor who's teaching this course? That's not a good sign. So let's get rid of that to begin with. So you need to be present. That doesn't mean that your entire life always needs to be dedicated to these courses that you're teaching, but it is important to state the program and your personal policies right at the beginning so that students have those expectations. And you can be present by liberally using the tools available to you. We have Canvas, and so with Canvas you can create announcements, you can participate in discussion boards, we can blog, you can email. But I want to talk about one thing about announcements, and that I hope that everybody has seen this, but as you're creating your announcement, there's this awesome thing called delay posting. And it's so important, I'm gonna highlight it here on the screen. Delay posting means that you can write out your announcement, and then when you click the delay, then you can establish which day you want to publish that announcement. And apparently, I grabbed this screen grab many years ago, about 2 years ago or so. But you can publish something 2 years out, next month, next week, tomorrow, today, later in the afternoon. You just say what day and what time do you want that to go out. And so each week you should be posting announcements, and throughout the week perhaps, but those weekly announcements, you can write them all before the term even starts, and then just say, okay, I want that to go out Sunday afternoon, and then maybe I'll have another announcement on week 3 on Thursday at 11 p.m. or at 3 p.m. or such. And so this way you can be active in the course and really set up that activity, that presence early in the course. There's no reason not to, really. And so it's a great way to be present. You can also link out to blogs. You can link out to email. But really that presence shows that the professor cares. Another tip that I would say is to communicate with your students. I'm just going to bump this up to the next animation here. Communicate. It's okay for you to leave every once in a while. You might be presenting at a conference and traveling, or you might have something else, to do. I'm gonna erase those marks on the slide. But the important thing is just to communicate. If you're going to be out, then let the students know. I really don't suggest that you're away for more than 2 days. You might miss a day. You might miss 2 days in 1 week, but don't have those be 2 consecutive days. Is what I was trying to get at. But if it's inevitable, if you can't avoid it, then just be a clear communicator. Let the students know the expectations, when you'll be back, when you will respond. Is there any way that they can get a hold of you if it's really an emergency, or, if they feel like it's an emergency, let them know. And another tip here for not just online professors, but any professor, if you have to send out that communication, that correspondence with those expectations, I'm going to be away. Don't apologize about it, but do express appreciation for their understanding. So that's a way for you to empower yourself and really establish your presence and your authority in the classroom. So don't apologize. Don't say I'm so sorry, but just explain the situation and say I really appreciate your understanding on this matter, and look forward to reconnecting in 2 days from now or whatever. So in a traditional classroom, students really bond face to face with the professor, but in an online classroom, that bond is only felt when the professor's presence is felt consistently, and that's the key, consistently. And so daily presence, it really shows that the professor cares, and that questions and concerns from students are important. Emails, try and respond to emails as quickly as you can, to be honest. Like, as soon as you're able to, then you get those emails replied to. Definitely not more than 24 hours out. I would aim for within 12. Before bed, try and make sure that there's no dangling emails out there if you can avoid it. Daily presence also communicates that the student thoughts, their experiences, their contributions are important, and that the professor is there as a mentor and as a guide, and that you're there to challenge the students. Ultimately, students do want to be challenged, and all of this can be overwhelming. And so you might focus on just a few things, like focus on being there in the discussions and posting announcements. You might even limit one-to-one email. I think that's very effective in bonding face to face with a student. But if you can communicate with an entire class to cover common issues, then that can be great as well. Um, and again, time released announcements are great because that shows your presence as well. I do have a warning though. I'm mentioning you need to be present in your class, but at the same time, too much presence can hinder constructivism. And so I'm just contradicting myself all over the place, and I'm not apologizing about that either. But what I mean is I don't want you to feel like you need to add significant contributions every time you check in, because we really are playing this role as the guide on the side, and that's important. And so I also mentioned that the instructor presence, it can take many different shapes, but we're going to talk about some research behind the presence, the various types of presence within a classroom. We're going to talk about social presence, teaching presence, and cognitive presence. Social presence is natural in a traditional classroom setting. And in fact, a lot of times you might be ending a class if you're teaching on ground. You might be ending a class, and while the discussion is fresh on their mind, they're packing up their bags, putting their computers and tablets away, but they're talking with their neighbors. It's just natural that they have a thought that they weren't able to contribute in the discussion, or they made a connection and they want to share that, or they have a question and they ask their buddy to the side of them, and they get in a discussion and it continues outside the class. They might walk down the hall. They might even take the discussion to a coffee shop. These are natural evolutions of the discourse that takes place within a classroom, and the relationships that are built by students within a classroom. And this is hard to replicate in an online setting. It's very hard to get those relationships, because even if you meet face to face live with a class through GoToMeeting or phone calls, as soon as people hang up or as soon as they log off, then they might be in different time zones. They might be in different hemispheres or continents, and they have different responsibilities, and they go on with their life, and they're disconnected with the rest of their cohort. And that's something that we have to overcome. We have to learn how relationships are built, and they need to be planned and cultivated. And that's a responsibility of the professor. How do I cultivate these online communities, and how do I be supportive? So with that, we're going to talk about the community of inquiry. And I hope that this is familiar to most people, the community of inquiry. It basically looks at these various constructs and how they overlap with each other. And as I said in that last slide, the traditional classroom, the community of learners is often a natural thing. Students interact with each other. They just cultivate relationships, even outside of the classroom sometimes. But in an online environment, these relationships are harder to cultivate. They really need to be coordinated. And so we're looking at, here's the cognitive presence over here to the side here. This involves the meaningful course design. It's the presentation of the curriculum in a meaningful way, and this would promote reflection and discourse. It's basically the course content that we have to work with, the textbook, the readings, the discussions that have been planned out. So in this aspect, students engage with the curriculum of the course. Just going to change my thing to the laser here. So students, the social construct, they interact with the course materials, and that's the cognitive. So that's what we're seeing with that intercept right there. But a good approach for building a supportive online community is to ensure an equilibrium of social, cognitive, and teaching. Teaching, of course, would be the professor. So we have professors, we have students, we have course materials, and we want to see an equilibrium of those. And what happens if we don't see that equilibrium? It can be difficult. So I have some animations there that I forgot about. So suppose that we don't have the cognitive construct in our courses. That would be a social construct intercepting with the teaching construct. What this is basically an unstructured internet meeting group where one of the people in the meeting group happens to have a PhD. And I'll note that this structure would not be accredited. This would just be the teacher doing his or her own thing. It could be, talking about their kids' soccer practice or whatever. It could be an internet chat group. So we don't want to see that. Of course, cognitive is a very important construct. We need course material. Accreditors want us to see course material. Here I have kind of a Mickey Mouse scenario where the teacher takes the role very seriously at the expense of the social and cognitive. They kind of get ignored a little bit. And you don't want to be that teacher. That would be the teacher who rambles, maybe forgets to assign homework or something. It's not likely for an online scenario, but in online, we want to be wary that professors are not monopolizing discussion boards, that they're allowing students the freedom and flexibility to really exercise their thought processes and contribute in meaningful ways. You don't want to be dominant in the classroom. That is not it's not very effective. Another scenario might be that this cognitive portion takes up a large portion, but at the expense of the social and teacher interactions, and even the student interactions with the cognitive load. And this is what we saw in the early days of the internet. This is what online learning looked like initially, unfortunately. I call those early days of e-learning data dumps. And we're talking about 15, 20 years ago. Those were the early days, the early 20-aughts, even maybe the late 90s, where people said, okay, we have all this material. Essentially, we have a traditional class. We want to teach it online. And so I'm going to put all of the readings and all of the materials, all of my slides, my notes online and give it to them as students and say, okay, here's the content, go, read all of this stuff, learn all this stuff. They were basically data dumps. And that was a course design pitfall. We were assigning a lot of readings with some assessments to gauge learning outcomes, and that was it. There was no community involved. The professor could essentially check out and just give students busy work. And that's not what we want to see in online learning. And luckily, we don't see too much of that anymore, but we still have to be wary of that pitfall. Here's another model. You can see the social aspect is very large. There's some cognitive stuff, but the teacher is disengaged in this aspect. The teacher isn't even connected there. And this is essentially a high school study hall where the students are sat down and they say, okay, go at it. At least have a book in front of you or pretend like you're doing schoolwork or something. And I'm going to go, check memes and email and such. You don't want the students to be the driving force of everything. The teacher does need to be involved. You can't be laissez-faire in online learning, especially in higher education. The students, that's not what they signed up for. So going back, in case we forgot, the ideal model looks like this, where we have equal dialogues between the faculty and the learners with other learners, and as well as the learners with the cognitive, the resources of the classroom. And it should go without saying that the teachers should also know the content of the classroom. They should be very adept in that. And so I'm going to focus now on the webinar in this section here, this social part of the section here. And how can we strengthen that community, the social community? So I'm going to list off a few things, have some ideas. If you have questions or comments at any time, feel free to enter them in the questions box or the chat window, and I'll be checking those on my other screen here. But I'm going to go through, and at this point, I would love if you have contributions to make them. If you have ideas or anything, then let me know. So I'm going to walk through my ideas of how can we really strengthen this bond between the students and the teachers. One, and I know I'm reiterating myself at this point, would be the announcements that we have. And those should be, you can have weekly concept overviews. A good practice that I found is to have, within the module, you can create a video that talks to the students about what you expect for that week. And it would be a screencast, and reach out to me if you want different platforms. But we have Panopto within Canvas that you can record a screencast. You can go to screencast-o-matic.com, create a free account and make screencasts that way. But walk through assignment by assignment, go through the rubrics, let the students know what are your expectations, what are you looking for in terms of their contributions this week, and your expectations, and then create an announcement at the end of the week, which would be, either the beginning of the next week or the end of the current week, and talk about your reflections. What are the main points that were connected? What did people do well? What did you like about it? Where are we going from now based on this last week, what we discussed? How does it tie into this next week's content? How does it tie in with the course learning outcomes and the institutional outcomes? And how can it be relevant outside of the classroom? So you can have various announcements. One can live in a module, and it can be a granular, nitty-gritty housekeeping of expectations, and then a high-level overview, really connecting the dots. And that really increases your presence within the class, letting them know that you are hearing them and appreciating their contributions, and kind of connecting the dots with them. And so I meant to put this up, but that would be the weekly concepts overview videos. And I recommend screencast as much as you can. Turn your webcam on, let them see your face as much as possible, because video is my next tab here. Video is incredibly important. Have video whenever you can. Turn on your webcam as often as possible. You can record webcam videos for email. If you're emailing within Canvas, then you can do a webcam video there. You can do face-to-face in the gradebook as well. You can turn your webcam on and give webcam feedback that way, as well as announcements, pages, discussion threads. There are a lot of opportunities for you to integrate video into the model. And it doesn't always have to be a webcam either. It can be a YouTube video that you find relevant. I shared a few videos in the discussion thread last week with the class that I thought was relevant, including Milgram. I wanted to make sure everybody knows the Milgram studies, but not everybody has seen the original footage. And so I thought that was important, because it really added to the discussion that we were talking about, which was consumer motivation and things like that. So yeah, use video as much as possible. It's easy in Canvas. It's easy to drop YouTube, Vimeo. It's easy to turn on the webcams as well. Another aspect is interacting on discussion boards. That's very important as well. My guideline, and different programs are going to have different guidelines. My guideline is that I should be in the discussion board participating at least 150% of based on the roster that I have. Meaning, if I have 10 students in my class, I should be in the discussion board at least 15 times, and maybe 20 times. 200% is also a good thing to strive for. But with larger classes, I'm teaching a class right now that has 18 or 19 students, and so that can be a little overwhelming for me. But when possible, that's a great way to do it. As well as, you don't want to just be in there on Thursday and Sunday. You want to make sure that students are active throughout the week. I have guidelines that I announce at the beginning of the term. In addition to the rubric for the class, I have an announcement that I release, and it talks about my expectations. What is a substantive post? And I tell them I want initial threads on Wednesday. I want you to participate at least 3 separate days throughout the week. Meaning they could drop 20 comments in one day. I would prefer them to have one comment on 3 different days: Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, or Thursday, Friday, and Sunday, so that we're in there often, frequently. It's kind of like weeding a garden, or if anybody has experienced gardening, it's best to get out there, even if it's for 10 minutes every day, as opposed to spend 2 hours every Saturday. Your garden's just going to be more presentable, and it's going to be better if you dedicate small doses. And I mentioned this in this model here because I also expect that of teachers. If you say that students need to post on 3 separate days, that they need to be present in a discussion board, that means the professor also needs to be present in the discussion board. Video feedback, I mentioned before in that video section, but reiterating, SpeedGrader allows you to upload video or to record a webcam video, and it's incredibly effective. And I'll share an anecdote of a few years ago. It's been many years ago, but this really stuck with me, where I was at home and I hurt my hand in so much that I had to mobilize it, or immobilize it, I suppose, for several days. And at one point I had to give feedback to students. I was grading papers, I think, but I didn't have my hand. And I can't remember, I think it might have been my right hand, my dominant hand, but I had to give this feedback. And so instead of marking up the paper and writing out comments in SpeedGrader, I told the students, didn't apologize, didn't say I'm sorry, but I said, I appreciate your understanding, but I had an injury, and so I have to just create videos. And so I took a screencast and I showed the student papers on the screen and just talked through it. And I couldn't write out my responses. I just talked through it and showed the video and gave each student their own video of me talking through their papers. And they really appreciated that. And I made a note of that. Like, their response was more than any of the other assignments that I graded. And so I realized that maybe students don't care so much about the traditional, feedback styles, but they really appreciate seeing my face and hearing my voice. And as I talk through their work, it seemed very personal to them. And so definitely don't be afraid to turn on your webcam. Students really appreciate it, and I'll tell you that you turn on your webcam 2 times in the course, and the 3rd time you don't even think about it. You don't, at first you might think, oh, what about my hair? What about this or that? And there are definitely some tricks, you don't want to be overly disheveled, particularly, but as you turn on your webcam more frequently, and as you encourage students to do so as well, it just becomes natural, and it helps to build a community. So video, I have on there twice. I forgot why I put. I'll say that was intentional, just because video is so important. Look for videos that are relevant, and use them wherever you can. You might consider podcasts or mini lectures. There's a lot of research about the length of lectures, and we're finding less and less that in online learning that an hour-long or 90-minute long lecture, they tend to be not effective. And students really appreciate shorter videos that are more accessible. So I'm thinking in 5 minutes. There's research from Harvard or MIT, I can't remember, regarding their platforms and edX and how they use lecture. And they say really, 3 to 5 minutes can be really effective. Beyond 6 minutes, beyond 8 minutes, it becomes less effective. And perhaps that's why also the TED Talks tend to be effective. There are very few TED Talks over 15 minutes. A lot of them are 8 minutes or 12 minutes long, and it feels like they cover a lot of content. There's some TED Talks that are like 90 seconds long as well, how to tie your shoes and such. And so, yeah, consider those mini lectures. I'll just talk about one more aspect, and that is office hours. Office hours are hard in online learning. I'll tell you, in this term, I have students, in one of my classes, I have students from, I think, just about every time zone within the continental US, as well as I have a student from Colombia, I think a student from Mexico, and a student from South Africa. And so it can be hard, to find a time when everybody can work together. I've had students in the past from Australia and Korea, Ireland, Iraq, and it can be hard holding live office hours. And so sometimes you might set up a discussion post or something asynchronous, but be available for students when they need you, maybe schedule one-on-one. But if you do want to hold an office hour, you could consider, this is only an idea, giving extra credit for office hour attendance. And it might not be every time they attend the office hours, but maybe for every 2 sessions that they attend, and if they contribute, then they can earn 10 points or something, not something that it would really sway, their grade, but something that would motivate them, even if it's trivial. So I'm going to pause right now before I go on to the next slide. I did have one last note, and that's video. I just want to say video one more time. I can't underestimate that. We've surveyed students, and what they have said resoundingly is, we want more videos in our classes. But I'm going to take a break, to just take a pause and address some of the things that are coming in the questions in the chat window there. And I hope you don't mind if I share this, but one attendee here says, using weekly go-to meeting has been super helpful to get the weekly expectations cleared up, and allowing students to ask questions. You're in Eastern Standard Time, which is the same with me. I'm in Orlando, and and students could be in Pacific Standard Time as well, which is my boat as well. Incorporating video discussion boards has been a huge success as well. Even though students are not thrilled in the beginning to video themselves, I almost always get nothing but positive feedback from students who provide video replies to each other, and it allows me to connect with them as well. And I had that same experience as a student. So it was probably 2011 or so. I took a class just for the fun of it. I wanted to see from my alma mater, from my undergrad, I wanted to see what are they doing with online learning. So I took a couple of instructional design classes just, on the side. And I was surprised because video discussion boards were very big, and they were using Canvas. They were actually the first school to ever use Canvas. This was BYU Hawaii, and so they wanted video discussion threads. Every post had to be a video, which I think was a little bit overly done. But I remember the initial discussion threads, I would actually record my video on my computer, edit it in Camtasia, take out all of the because I have a multimedia background, and so I'd essentially clean it up and produce a perfect video and upload that as it was just perfection. And after a week or so, that became very onerous, and so then I became more organic in that I would just upload it as me, and you just let down that shield, that barrier. So it is a hurdle that you have to overcome, turning on that webcam, but it is very easy to do, and it's so beneficial because people get to know you. People want to know you. You want to know your students, and so it's great. Another comment here is I've been recording my GoToMeeting and wanted to send it to them through Canvas Notes. Having trouble sending the AV audio and video attachment as a recording. Seems too long. Do I need to send it separately? Feel free to reach out to me afterwards, but if you record GoToMeeting, what you have to do is render it first, and it usually prompts you as you want to render this. You'll save that, and that file would be an MP4, and from there you can either upload it to Panopto, which is integrated into Canvas, or you can upload it into Canvas directly. But it doesn't matter how large it is. The Canvas, and if you don't have enough space in your classroom, reach out to somebody in instructional design or myself in my department, Ed Tech, and we can give you more space. But typically we don't see that that's a problem. But you can have more space if you want. The important thing is that you need a steady internet connection, because if there's ever a break or a lag as you're uploading it, then it'll cut it all out and it'll stop the upload and you have to restart it. But there isn't really a file size, and you can try Panopto. I think that would be a good approach to use. Reading through the comments real quick. If you upload to YouTube, then it will add the closed captions, which is important to consider ADA. And that's a great point. Actually, that's advice that I was giving to faculty, a year and 2 years ago. Upload it to YouTube, I think the past year, because it captions it. You can edit the captions afterwards. And we do have, I know that we're in discussion for captioning software. I am just going to look through the attendee list real quick to see if our accessibility person is on. It looks like he didn't make the call, but I know that we're in the final stages of getting a vendor, a captioning vendor specifically. So YouTube is definitely a good workaround, and I think that their algorithm is actually pretty good. Nothing beats human dictation experts, but Google is doing pretty well and for free. So yeah, Lee, go ahead and reach out to me afterwards. It seems like, yeah, we can walk through how to render, convert, and upload into Canvas, because it should be a good thing. So I'm going to jump ahead now to the next slide. So we talked about this intercept between the teaching and social constructs of the community of inquiry. Now we're going to jump over to the social and cognitive constructs, which is essentially how can students better interact with the course materials, the structure of the class itself. And so course introductions is one way. And I think that I might actually be a little bit spontaneous right now. And I'm going to pull up something something that I tried out this week. So typically, um, as we're talking about introductions, we have to have students participate in an introduction discussion because that's how we track attendance. And typically, the instructions are something like review of the policy. You need to participate by Wednesday of this week so that we can mark you as present in the course and respond saying, what is your name? Where are you from? What do you want to get out of this course? Banal stuff, really, when you think about it. And it's the same every term. They probably just copy and paste, and it's not very engaging. There might be a few students who are engaged and really active, and they'll respond to other students saying, "Oh, it's good to meet you. It's great to see you again," or whatever. And I really appreciate those students. But I wanted to do something this term I wanted to really know my students. And so what I did, and I'm popping over to a live class. I won't show any of the student responses, but I just wanted to look at the numbers. Typically in a class, if you have 18 students, the initial response might get about 30 responses, 50 if they're particularly engaged. This time around, I told students, instead of the usual, tell us where you're from and why you're taking this course, whatever, I told them, I want you to create a Padlet. Go to padlet.com, create an account, make a Padlet, and share the Padlet with us. And I included instructions like on how to do that, what I want to see in your Padlet, and how to embed a Padlet into a discussion post, because you can actually embed into discussions. You don't just have to type out words, but you can include pictures and responses. I took some videos of how to do the process and how to embed it, how to copy the code. Once you're in your discussion, how do you put that code into the response and publish it, and so that you can share it with us. And then I gave them an example of my own Padlet. I created a Padlet where I talk about things, my family and my job, fun things. We like to go to Disney. I just wanted to make it real personal. I wanted to get to know my students. I want to know what their faces look like. What's important in their life? Is it family? Is it hobbies? Do they travel? Do they cook? What do they think is interesting? What's their background? Where have they gone? And so the whole discussion is them embedding these Padlets. And I had 18 students, and you can see, I should mark all those as, as red, 2 accounts. But I had almost 300 responses. And I can tell you, not all of those are mine. Those are maybe 20, 25 of those are my responses. The rest of them are students interacting with each other. And I can tell you, I'm not going to show you the responses, but they were significant. They were really engaged with each other. And so that Padlet, those introductions, I think really made a difference in helping to engage. And plus, I have something to refer back to. If I'm grading early in the term, I might think, okay, who's this person, Bob or George? Let me remember about this person. I'll hop back to this intro page and look at his Padlet or her Padlet and remember, oh yes, this is the person who likes to travel. This is the person who likes to make falafel on Friday nights or something, and it's very engaging in that sense. Which is not exactly where I wanted to go with this when I talk about course introductions, but I want to give a shout out to Pacific Oaks. I've actually taught a few classes for Pacific Oaks College, and I see some Pacific Oaks people on the call here. They have something called a weekly cafe, which I really appreciate. It's early in the week, like on a Monday, and it's less formal. It's not really, anything accreditation wise or content wise that's really impressive, but it's a discussion post where they get to know each other. They can share personal updates with each other, talk about their family, their friends, pets, hobbies, photos, share photos with each other. Did you go skiing? Did you go to a wedding or a concert or some kind of weekend outing? What's going on in your life? I apologize. I've had students give us, ongoing sagas about the fridge that they're going to buy and the fridge that they ended up buying and how did that work out for them. And then, so that's part one, is I want some personal dialogue. Let's just chat, what's stressing you out? What's going on? And then the second part is applying the previous content from the previous week to their life, to their work or their life. Not necessarily like inside the classroom, but what was your aha moment for that week? And that's what I appreciate, is that aha moment. Tell us tell us the epiphany that you had, big or small. And they're very informal. When I graded them, it was pretty much, did you contribute or not? So if you did, then I give you a check mark, and it's good to go. I'm not going to criticize, I'm not going to critique somebody's pictures of their hobbies or something, but it really helps get the community involved. And then that second aspect really helps them to, in an informal setting, kind of a water cooler setting or a commons setting, apply the content of the week to their daily lives. And I think that's important. Let me jump to the next animation here. So those are the weekly cafes. You can have student forums as well. General open student forums for students to request or post help or assistance. And this could be peer-to-peer, or it could be peer-to-professor. And that might be something that you have within the course home module, or it could be a discussion thread that spans the length of the course that you put into every unit. And I apologize, I'm going to take a sip of water. I can make it 10 more minutes, or a few minutes, and then Q&A. Sorry about that. So you might even consider creating something like a student union or a student coffee shop. This could be a formal student group within Canvas where they can collaborate, brainstorm, or interact with each other or support each other. And reach out to me for sure if you have questions about Canvas groups, because that's a fantastic function within Canvas, where students can have their own workspace within the classroom that not every professor knows about that. You might also, as we're talking about getting students to engage with each other and with the content, is assign students to moderate or facilitate discussions. This is something that I personally have never tried, but I've read about it, and I think it's intriguing. I think it's fascinating, and I'm looking for an opportunity to try it. But have students actually moderate the discussions. So ahead of time, you would provide guidelines and expectations, maybe give them training and supervise them, and then rotate moderators each week. And if it's a large class, which we typically don't have very large classes in our institutions, but upward of more than 20, maybe 30, 40 students, then you might even divide the discussions into groups with 6 or 7 students in a group discussing, and then 1 or 2 moderators for that group, as opposed to a large class discussion that we typically have. You also consider group work or project work. And as I mentioned, this project work, I hear a universal groan among students who aren't even on this call, just thinking about project work, because project work teaches you to trust nobody. But really in online, especially, it can be very effective. And the trick is that project work should be collaborative, such as wikis or blogs. I say the trick, but really I've given entire webinars on only group projects and how to effectively do group projects. And it's also something I might reprise later in the spring as well. But by design, the assignments need to be constructed in such a way that everybody needs to contribute to them. Here's a guideline. If you assign group work and it can be done by one person, then it will get done by one person. And that would be really an individual assignment that you're assigning to a group. You really want collaboration. And if there's no collaboration, then it's not a group project. It's an individual assignment. So consider that. Actually, I want to, before I go on to the next slide, I want to mention, another key to group projects, group work, is to recognize individual effort. Even if they submit a deliverable as a team, recognition is really a two-way street, and it can involve incentives and penalties as well. Recognizing individual work as, you didn't pull your weight, and that can be a bad thing. But when students feel that they are individualized and that their presence is being monitored, they're going to act in a much different way than if they can hide behind ambiguity or like group presence. And I'll talk about a group project that I have this term, and I hid inside the presentation here. I hid a rubric. I have the students doing group work every week, and it's just small projects, but it culminates to a big project that's a capstone project at the end of the term, which they submit individually, but they work throughout the term as a group. And each week I assign a different team leader, and the team leader is responsible for organizing the deliverable for that week, communicating with people. They're the ones who are going to submit the project on behalf of the group, and they also evaluate the other team members. And so I have them put their name up here at the top, and then they name each of the students in their group, and there's 4 criteria. They rate each student on teamwork, contribution to the project, subject matter knowledge, essentially whether they read the reading assignments and they know what they're talking about, and then communication, which is responsiveness. And on this other page here, I have a list of how they can evaluate each criterion. And so, teamwork, did this person, work as a team to achieve your objectives and outcomes? Did they communicate? Were they responsive to email? Did they participate in your discussions and communicate their thoughts and ideas effectively? And so this is something that I give to the team leaders each week, and I rotate team leaders every week. And I send out an email. I have an email already written out that I just copied to the new team leaders saying their responsibilities. And so they keep each other accountable. It's not just me evaluating. And that also means that students have buy-in because they know they're going to be evaluated by a peer. They're also going to have a chance to evaluate their peers. And so it kind of forces them to be effective team members. It forces them to have teamwork and to be on the same page and be on the same group. And I also mentioned, so this group I have, the groups I have, and it's consumer motivation. So I have a group for Apple, a group for Disney, retail stores, Nordstrom's, and they're with the same group for the duration of the class, which means they build a rapport week after week. And they also can, change responsibilities. And so they get to know each other. It's not a short-term one and done type of project. It's more long-term. And I would even support, if programs are interested, long-term projects that span courses. And I know some programs have things like that, but it would be great to have the curriculum aligned in such a way that students can really move from one class to the next. But that's a different discussion. And so if we have the community of inquiry, really the sweet spot that we have is to be right here in the middle. We don't want to be too far out to one side or another. So things that you can do, if you want effective discussions, you should define everything at the beginning of the term. How long should their post be? What's the definition of a substantive post? What are the milestones, expectations? What's the quantity of discussion posts they should have throughout the week? How many times do they need to check in? How many times do they need to be present in some way or another? What does a proper reply to their post entail? Do you want them to proofread or format it? Should it be APA? And again, if you expect students to be active in the course, then you have to be active as well. Another way that you can build this community is to solicit feedback. It might be surveys, polls, extra credit. Look up things like Poll Everywhere and ask students, what's working so far? Or it might be an announcement. How could your learning experience be improved? Or what do you want, or what do you need help with in the course? What are the top 3 or 5 things that you've understood and really been able to apply so far in the term? Another thing that might be interesting to really espouse this social and cognitive presence is, yes, we have discussion posts, but consider discussion debates. Have groups, and this is something that I really want to try as well. I haven't tried it yet in my class. I haven't had the opportunity, but have a debate where you divide your class into 2 groups, a pro group and a con group, for and against, and give them their own separate space. Again, reach out to me if you want to talk more about how to make groups in Canvas and assign students to groups. But you can have one group, come up with a post on Monday, and the next group has to come up with a post on Tuesday, and they meet together separately. They'll have a day to think about what they want to construct and construct an argument, and then the team leader for that week would post, or whoever they designate would post their response. And so it wouldn't be an active thread with lots of replies like we typically see in our discussions with 20, 50, 100 responses or 300 responses. It would be very curated with maybe 6 responses throughout the week, but very thought out, and responses that students create as a group. So maybe the even days is a pro group post and the odd days is a con group post. But yeah, students, I see a comment in here, students are so imaginative. The debates are great, and so consider that discussions can be banal, especially if it's the same thing every week and every course for every time, every term in their the progression of their program. So be imaginative in that aspect. With group projects, you might have a wiki page. Classes or groups can curate the content there. We have pages within Canvas. You can create a page just for a group or for the class, and you can give them editing rights so that they build something together. I've had things where I have a Padlet, which was what I was showing in the course, where we work for the week as a class to create the Padlet, and I give each person their own space on Padlet, which is kind of like Pinterest. Pinterest would be the same thing, and I've used Pinterest in the past as well. But the class works together to create something as a class, and then I assign them a reflection paper at the end. And it's also good to link to current events, and ask students to really incorporate their workplace into their posts. What's relevant for you. And so, I've talked with you a lot. I wanted to end on this slide right here, which is characteristics of an excellent online professor. And this is just based on some research that I did at looking online, and it's actually kind of old. I could update this, maybe create my own, but I wanted to see what are other institutions talking about. And so this is very bad practice, very bad form, and it's a bad way to end a webinar. But just reading through, Kirscher mentioned, apologize, I have a thing I need to turn down the volume of this monitor here. An online professor should be organized, highly motivated, more motivated than a non-ground professor, enthusiastic, committed to teaching, support student-centered learning, open to suggestions, I think very important, especially as we're building communities. They should be creative. They should take risks. Online is a risk to begin with. Manages time well. That's true with students as well. Responsive to learner needs. Disciplined, interested in online delivery without expectation of other rewards. This comes from Savory, talking about being vocal, being visible, organized, compassionate, analytical, a leader by example, not just somebody who's driving the boat and pulling along a bunch of skiers, but a real guide on the side. And then this is the Illinois Institute here, talking about life experience, demonstrate openness, concern, flexibility, sincerity, strong written communication, which I'd also expect from students as well. A facilitator, a critical thinker, and somebody trained in online teaching, which is what we're getting right now. Thank you again, everybody, for coming, and I hope to see you next week. And reach out to me if you have questions or comments.